questions, put it on the chat, or you're free to ask your questions, anonymously, which would mean you could send it to Dr. Jamila or me, and it will be considered anonymous. But that will happen in the second half of the program when the question and answer round starts. Okay. So we are truly glad to have Dr. Jamila Koshy with us, who's a psychiatrist by practice, a graduate from the Armed Forces Medical College, Pune, and has completed her postgraduate studies in psychological medicine from the University of Mumbai. He's also a writer and author of many books, related to family and matters of faith, and truly a wonderful person, as a lot of us know her. And, we are so glad that she's here once again to share wealth of her knowledge and experience with us. This is that time of the year when if you step out at 12 o'clock midnight outside your house quietly, and if you just listen intently into the still night and try to listen with your keen ears, you'll be able to hear many New Year resolutions breaking after 20th Jan slowly. And so we are here to discuss one of the most important challenge is how to bring about real change. And that's why we have Dr. Jamila Koshy here to share. So over to Dr. Jamila. Welcome, Doctor.
Hi, Abhijit, thank you. Yes, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Talking about New Year resolutions, that reminds me of this cartoon which people put up every year around this time. It's two aliens talking to each other. They're looking at all the, the crackers going off and stuff happening, and they're saying, "What's happening on Earth?" And one alien tells the other that they are celebrating their planet making a circle around their sun, orbiting their star, going once around their star. So then the other one says, "I told you they're not very intelligent." So somehow we celebrate our planet going around our star, and at that time we make all sorts of promises to ourselves that we will, we will do this and we will do that. So yeah, New Year's.
There is some audio disturbance, I think, because of the wire, probably. Is that shaking?
Is it better now?
Yes. Yeah, fine.
I'll be sure not to shake it. All right. So yeah, this is definitely the time when we all start thinking about making changes in our life and all that. Particularly younger people do that. As you get to my age, you kind of stop doing that. But anyway, so it is good to have a time when we renew ourselves, when we think on our lives. So to that extent, it is really important to have new beginnings all the time. And God has worked into our lives this whole seasonality, isn't it? There is summer, there's winter, there's this repetition which happens, and just the sheer cyclicity of our lives makes us sort of look for new beginnings, look for a new start every now and then. So that's important, and we can use it for our benefit. So we should. And let me share my screen as I talk about what Abhijit asked me to this day, which is about the whole issue of bringing about real change in our life. My screen is visible?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there are many issues which trouble us, aren't there? And we mentioned some of those in the poster. Addictive behavior kind of actually increases a little bit around December, because we have all this yummy food to eat, and sometimes there's wine to drink, and sometimes there's holidays. And holidays are the time when we sort of are free to indulge sometimes in other addictive behaviors. So social media usage may go up. Unfortunately, porn usage is a big problem for many people. So how do we bring change in this area? This is something just constantly talked about. It's a huge problem, addictive behavior. Negative thinking patterns trouble many of us. They range from despondency and despair to things like anger and hate and cynicism. Those are again one set. But there's also the other kind of things like narcissism. Okay, and narcissism is much in the news these days because of several people who are being sort of accused or paraded as narcissists. Particularly right now, the unfortunate Duke and Duchess of Sussex are being pulled over as narcissists. And of course, prime ministers and heads of various countries were lampooned as narcissists. But then this kind of self-centered, grandiose, me-central thinking is common to many of us, even though we may not have full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. Discriminatory thinking patterns are very common. And uh, over the last 2 days, India has been seeing this sort of outpouring of different kinds of sentiments over a film that was made by BBC, accusing the ruling party and in particular its head of discriminatory treatment towards Muslims in the country. And this kind of discriminatory behavior begins with negative thinking patterns and discriminatory thinking patterns in our brains. And these can cause all sorts of problems in our life. Relationship conflicts are common, and it's very few of us who would not have some kind of conflicts in our relationships, whether within our innermost circle, that is our spouse and children, perhaps our parents in the slightly further circle, and then going further out, we have our friends, our our work friends, our church friends, our our extended family. So conflicts within relationships are common, and we need to sometimes deal with these things, and they can be very troublesome, and they can be in our minds and affect relationships for years and years and years. Work issues are very important, particularly after COVID. A lot of people have gone into stages of unemployment or losing half of their salary or things like that. There's been a lot of discontent. People are not quite happy with their jobs. The bosses are laying off people, and there's uncertainty about work. Because of this, there is a tendency to protect your job, to not share information, and all these leads to relationship issues at work. And it can lead also to the opposite of sort of always being bothered about work and becoming workaholics. So these are some problems which I presume would be affecting many of us at some time, and particularly at this time at New Year's, when we start thinking about making changes in our life. Okay, so let's think about how we can do this. And being a psychiatrist with a background in psychology and medicine, I always like to bring this in because it's so relevant. And this is something that we owe to the Freudian understanding of the mind, but it is really very, very true. Our minds are much like icebergs. An iceberg is a huge chunk of actually fresh water. Okay, it breaks off from a glacier which forms on land. So an iceberg is fresh water, a huge chunk of it, which has broken off from a glacier perhaps and is now floating in the saltwater sea. And a little portion of it is above the sea level, but the bulk of the iceberg is below sea level. And that is an interesting metaphor to use for the mind, because the mind is something like this. In the mind, you have only a little bit which is over the sea level. So you can see the gray portion, which is the preconscious, okay, here. And over the preconscious level, you can see this bit of the iceberg which is poking above the sea level. Your thoughts, your perceptions, your very obvious statements, or your likes and dislikes, those things which are very obvious and declared to the world, your presentation to the world, perhaps things which you think yourself, which you know yourself. These are the things which are in your conscious mind, which you know, which you understand. Going a little deeper, just below the water surface, is what is preconscious. If you dig a little bit, these things may come out. Perhaps stored knowledge, okay, things, information that we might have forgotten, but we just pull it out and it's just there, ready to hand. A couple of cues and we are there. Some digging and that memory comes back up. But the great bulk of our mind really is at the unconscious level. Okay, so this is the level at which we do not go there. These are the areas which we do not like to touch. Our fears, our unacceptable desires, whether romantic or sexual, or the irrational dreams that we have, the dreams perhaps which we know will never be fulfilled. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be, I want to be famous. I want to perhaps make a real change in the world, or something like, uh, perhaps I want to hurt somebody. Okay, perhaps I have a desire for somebody who is not permitted to me. So some immoral wish, or some selfish desire that I want this person to be only mine. Okay, I don't want to share this person with anybody else. So some kind of maybe selfish or sexual or violent, these are the more hidden, the dark side of us, which we shove down into our unconscious. We don't like to think about it. It might pop up sometime though. Shameful experiences often get shoved into our unconscious. So things like child sexual abuse, or any kind of trauma which we have had, which we blame ourselves for, or some shameful experience that we have had in school or college where we really made an ass of ourselves. These are things which we would like to forget, and we are unconscious about it.
Dr. Jamila,
This is a nice picture.
there is a
Yes.
feedback about your audio cable shaking, and so there is disturbance for me. Yeah, because it shakes so well. Yeah. No, the volume is very low.
Okay, I've taken off the headphones.
Yeah. Now it's fine. Now it's fine. Yeah, perfectly fine. Thank you.
Okay, so I was saying that
No, the audio is dropped again. The audio is dropped again.
Okay.
Yeah. Now it's fine.
Better now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Little forward. Yeah.
Okay, so right. So I was just saying that mind is like an iceberg. This is a suggestion which Freud made, and which has a lot of truth to it. We've talked about the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the unconscious levels of the mind. So this is a picture which sort of graphically depicts the unconscious mind memories. This is from the Inside Out movie, if any of you have seen it. It's a good movie to see if you want to explain the mind to your children or to a young person. This is a sort of imaginary friend which Riley had as a kid. So she's looking down at this imaginary friend from a long distance off. He's just come back into her memory. Okay, and you can see he's fading out. He's not quite there. So this is what the unconscious mind is sometimes like. It can be dredged up. The Johari window is another way of looking at the mind, and this is it is more a management sort of technique, but it's using the same principles as the Freudian iceberg metaphor. But here you look at it as 4 squares. The left, this corner square, the green one, is the square which is known to yourself and known to others as well. This portion here is the stuff which is known to you, but not known to others. You've hidden it from others. So as I said, things which you know about yourself, maybe that I'm prejudiced about so-and-so, or I have this desire to be the MD of the company in 10 years. I may not want everybody to know that. I know it myself. There may be things about yourself which you are blind to, but others can see very well. That's this corner. That's your blind spot. So you may not realize that you come across as bigoted. You may not realize that you come across as hateful. You may not realize that you come across as maybe flirtatious, okay? But others can see this. So this is an area which is not known to you, but is known to others. And finally, you have this dark area over here, which is not known to others or to yourself. Okay, so this is the Johari window of explaining the mind. Why am I going into all these details? Because if we want to see real change, we have to work on our minds, because that's where it all starts. Okay, another example, another metaphor for the mind is from Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. And I love this example as well, because it's so graphically a metaphor of the mind. As you can see, this is the front room of a library, of the library, Unseen University. Okay, this is a depiction of it. So it's quite neat, and you can see that there are a few odd things like books floating around and things like that, but it's an orderly library, and there's lots of books. But then what is weird about the library in Unseen University is that it extends and extends and extends. There's no end to it. So people would go into it carrying breadcrumbs so that they would find their way back. Okay, that's what it says. And as you go further and further in, the place gets crazier and crazier, and you have all sorts of books which do all sorts of funny things and a lot of chaos. Okay, so you can see that this is the inner portion of the unseen library. And as you go further into our own minds, that's how it gets a little crazy. Okay, so there's stuff in there which you don't know, things which are mixed up, things which are not orderly, things which are not acceptable, things which are hidden. This is what the mind is like. So this is another picture of the mind. Okay, so what basically is inside there, and what do we do about what's inside there? Let's look at it from 2 points of view. One is the stuff in our minds, which is directed outwards. Okay, so you have a lot of bitterness or anger or sadness or anything. I've just called it bitterness, okay, because that's just anger, disappointment, sadness, all put together. You feel that something has happened to you by others, and that is causing this kind of feeling. So the cause for it is outside. You're directing your causation outside. You feel that hurt or injustice has been done to you, maybe through various events which happen. Okay, perhaps your family preferred your brother over you. Okay, so that's an event which happened many times, perhaps, but it caused a bitterness in you that I am not loved as much as my brother. Okay, or sister or whatever. Perhaps there were words used. Okay, you're useless. I wish you had not been born, or I don't think you have any sense, or words that are used which remain in our minds, cause the hurt and the bitterness, and are directed outwards. This person doesn't love me. This person doesn't think well of me. My friends are laughing at me. All these kind of things come because of the perception that it is coming from outside. Sometimes long-standing relationships can have all sorts of skewed dynamics. Okay, so you can have unfaithfulness, you can have violence, you can have maybe in a couple the attachment is more to a parent rather than to the spouse. You may have attachments to people outside the family, or all sorts of things can happen. Skewed dynamics can happen. Parents may be mean to their children. Parents may neglect their children, perhaps because they're not well or whatever, but for whatever cause, skewed dynamics can cause this kind of bitterness and feeling of not belonging, the feeling that this is coming from outside. So you're blaming the person outside. There may be, and this is very common in our country and elsewhere, sexual abuse and other forms of abuse, which really cause this kind of bitterness and sadness in people's lives. Okay. Now let's look at the bitterness which comes from a sense of failure, which is directed inside. Okay, so you're blaming yourself. You feel that you have not been a success in some way or the other. So there's this feeling of inferiority and failure. Perhaps you didn't do well in school. Perhaps you didn't get into a college that you wanted to, and you got into a college which is seen as a useless college. Perhaps your job is not as good as your sisters, your cousins, your brothers, your dads, whatever, your friends. And there's this constant nagging sense, I am a failure. I'm not as good as others. Perhaps you didn't get promotion. Perhaps you're not earning enough money. Perhaps you don't have skills, whether it is social skills or language skills or cooking skills or anything, okay? Something which makes you feel a failure. Sometimes you're not good with relationships, okay? Sometimes you've not been able to get the person you like to like you, okay? And you can end up feeling, I'm useless. Sometimes it may happen from a broken marriage or a breakup. Okay? From whatever it is, this sense of bitterness can really bother us, and it can be there inside us. Now, remember that this can include spiritual, religious, or even Christian versions of it. For instance, I've had so many people in ministry struggle with this, okay, because they haven't seen the kind of response that they prayed and hoped for. Perhaps they have been troubled by certain comments from the seniors in the ministry. Perhaps they may have not been as much fruit as they expected. Perhaps they have not grown their church to the extent they wanted to. Okay, so this kind of sense of failure can happen in our settings as well. Sometimes this new age, this new version, which we tell our young people of finding your calling, making a difference, changing the world, making a mark, leaving a legacy, all these things are good things. They're great things. We should be doing them. But they themselves can become a source of bitterness if we feel that we have failed in doing that. I have not made a mark. I've not done anything. I've not changed the world. I have not become excellent at something. So you may feel that you are a failure. Just in passing, before we go into the rest of it, to mention that God has always been more interested in who we are rather than what we do or become. But this is not how we think of ourselves. And that is the whole problem, isn't it? Okay. So now if we want real change, what are we to do? How are we to work at it? Well, if you go back to the iceberg metaphor, the iceberg has to melt, right? You have to let chunks of it break off and it slowly disintegrates. That's the idea. We want the iceberg to melt. If you're going to look at the library metaphor, then you have to find your way to the inner recesses of the library and expose everything and make everything orderly again, right? If you want to look at the Johari window, let's go back to that. Then what you have to do is this section, the green section, has to become larger and larger and larger, such that the blind spot and the hidden area and the unknown area becomes smaller and smaller and smaller as that green portion takes over most of this rectangle. That would be the idea. That is how you bring change. You have to expose your hidden, your unknown areas. You have to break off the chunks of the iceberg which are below the sea level, and you have to make your way into the inner recesses of the library. And that's how we can bring real change. Because those things hidden in there, those unconscious motives and drives, they are the things that make you angry and unhappy and conflicted. They're the things which make you bitter and jealous. They're the things which make you relate badly to people or struggle with your work, always striving, never content. Okay, so how do we do this? Let's go to that. We have about 10, 15 minutes more. So it's interesting to note that glaciers melt from the bottom up. Okay, this is a fact which I just learned today and I found it very interesting. So the water at the bottom, okay, the ice melts at the bottom and then it works its way up. So it's very interesting that glaciers melt at the bottom up. And that kind of ties in with my wanting the unconscious part below the water to melt first. But icebergs actually don't melt that way exactly. An iceberg melts by exposure to the sun, wind, and warmer water. So as the iceberg floats into warmer waters, it tends to melt. And it tends to melt somewhere near the waterline and below. And slowly it sort of bites into the iceberg here and here. And so then you have chunks of it which then break off by exposure to the water. So how do we do this? How do we start breaking off bits of the unconscious? How do we get into the inner recesses of the library? Well, the good thing is that our minds give us away. Whatever we try to hide doesn't actually remain hidden like that. It often comes out. We may try to hide it. We may not even be aware of it, but it comes out in different ways. And that is what we would, to use the same metaphor, that is exposure to the sun. That is exposure to the wind. It's exposure to the warmer waters. It's going into the recesses of the library. Our minds give us away, and therefore chunks of the iceberg break off. But we have to pay attention, otherwise we wouldn't notice the issues, okay? So you need to pay attention, for instance, to your spontaneous thoughts, okay? Your spontaneous or automatic thoughts are what often are a clue to your unconscious mind. When something happens, say, that I always use this example of how an automatic thought works. In Delhi, once we were going on the road and there was a pileup. Okay, so there was a car, maybe 3 or 4 cars ahead of mine, put the brakes on, and the cars behind, as you can imagine, they all crashed one into the other. Now, when that happened, a word came out of my mouth which I would normally never use. Okay, now that was my first instantaneous and spontaneous reaction to the pileup. Okay, and it's just an example that what is our first thought when something happens? Keep a careful eye on that, because that will tell you what your unconscious motivation is. Similarly, what is your first emotion when something happens? And for this, the best example that I can give is an episode from Friends where Monica and Phoebe and Rachel are discussing Rachel's possible pregnancy. Okay. And Rachel doesn't want to look at her pregnancy test, and she asks Phoebe to do it. Okay. I hope you are all familiar with these three young ladies from Friends. So when Phoebe looks at the pregnancy test, she tells Rachel that the test is negative. And Rachel's first reaction is, oh, it's negative. And she is actually disappointed. And then she asks Phoebe again, is it really negative? And then Phoebe says, no, it's positive. I just said it was negative to see what your reaction would be. Because that actually told her what she wanted. She wanted to be pregnant. She wanted to have a baby. So pay attention to your emotions. What are your emotions telling you? Okay, what are your initial emotions telling you? What are your subsequent emotions telling you? Pay attention to them. They are giving you clues to your unconscious mind. Third thing, pay attention to the elephant in your room. Okay, that's the obvious thing. If there is an obvious problem in your life, it's probably the issue that is bothering you. Okay, even though you may say, no, that's not an issue. So if, for instance, your husband has a drinking problem, then say that I'm not bothered about it. I'm fine. Problem is actually my sister-in-law or something like that. Unlikely. Okay. That elephant is quite likely going to be a big issue for you. Okay. So let's pay attention to the obvious things. Let's not deny them. There is a lot of denial and minimization which we do in our lives. We should learn to stop that and pay attention to the obvious things. Similarly, what about the invisible scripts in your life? Okay, these are the things which are socially the norms, the expectations from us. So the expectations, for instance, are that by the time you are 25 or 30, a girl should be married. And that's the invisible script of our society. Perhaps your society puts the bar even lower. I don't know. Okay. So if that is happening, that might be the cause of a lot of stress in your life. Suppose there's an invisible script that the eldest son takes care of the parents, or the youngest son takes care of the parents, or whatever it is. What is it in your family? That kind of expectation is probably putting the stress on you, whether or not you are accepting it and living by it or whatever. So pay attention to those things. They will give you clues as to what your deep issues are and how to handle them. Very important, keep a diary. Okay. Now ensure privacy by whatever way you can, perhaps through password protecting your diary if you're doing it online, or keeping it in a safe place or whatever. But cut clues and write your diary. Write it all down. Whatever thoughts come in your mind. By the way, that's how psychotherapy works. Okay, we ask the person to just keep talking, and as they talk, and if they talk openly and without any barriers up, a lot of things come out which are dredged up from the unconscious, and give clues to what you're thinking, give clues to what is bothering you, give clues to why you are drinking, give clues to why there are these negative emotions in your life. They give clues to what are the conflicts in your life. What are you actually bothered about your spouse? Did you actually feel jealous of them? Do you actually feel insecure around them? Do you feel that you are not good enough for them? Do you feel angry that some slight was given to you? Whatever it is, when you write, it all comes down. If you can't write, use a voice recorder or something like that. Go back to it and listen to it again and try and find out what is bothering you. Now, if you can't do this alone, share it with someone, either a wise friend, if they are experienced and trained enough, or else go and get help from a counselor, from a mental health professional. Because honestly, if you have these issues, there's no harm in getting help in dealing with them. Because why should you struggle with addictions? Why should you struggle with negative thoughts and feelings and problems with your spouse or whatever it is? Go and get help. As Christians and as spiritual people, if there are people who are not following the Jesus way, quiet times, prayer, meditation, reflection, all the rest of it is very important for, excuse me 1 minute. Is very important for changing our for finding out what is bothering us. And I'll tell you in a little bit how that works. But these can also be times where we understand our own unconscious thoughts and processes and what is going on with us. So it's very important that we understand. Becoming aware of what and why these things are happening in your mind and what is happening is a huge step forward. And there will be a lot of resistance. Your own mind will resist you. When you start doing it, you will feel lazy. You will feel, oh, this is not going to work. You will find all sorts of excuses not to do this, because our minds tend to create a sort of, a balance where we are not hurt. So we protect ourselves by these kind of barriers which we put up. Denial is one barrier. Minimization is another barrier. We don't want anyone intruding in our minds. We try to protect our inner selves by this. And we don't really want to open up, even with ourselves. So be prepared for resistance. But going into this is the most important thing that you can do in 2023. Once you understand it, okay, let's go to how Christians do it. Okay, as Christians, how would we do it? Allowing God to speak to us through his word is very important. When we read the word in our quiet times or our devotions, we are allowing the Spirit to uncover what is inside, our reaction to the word. Okay. For instance, if we read Jeremiah 29:11, it says that God has a plan for us. Okay, that he knows the plans he has for us, and they are good plans for our welfare. Now, when we read and meditate on that, allow the thoughts to come up, allow the actual honest reaction to come up. Perhaps you would want to say that, Lord, I do not see what your plan for me is. Lord, I'm not happy with this plan that you've laid out for me. Lord, I'm not able to find it. What's going on? Why isn't it coming through? What is the problem? Why did I get into this? So there may be a lot of honest reactions that we have, which will help us to uncover the source of our bitterness. Here it's clear. I'm not happy with my life the way it is. I'm wondering where God's plan is leading me. And perhaps there's some mistake that I made or some mistake that somebody else made, which has led me in slightly the wrong track. And I need to find how to correct it, move towards the plan that God has for me. So responding honestly to scripture in our quiet times is going to help us to dredge up these thoughts. For instance, if I was having a bad time with my spouse, okay, I'm bearing in mind a lot of grudges that my spouse did this, my spouse did that, okay. If I read 1 Corinthians 13, when I read love is patient and kind, love keeps no record of wrongs, when I read that, it should awaken my mind that, Lord, I'm sorry. I have been bearing this against my spouse. I've been keeping this in my mind. I've not been able to forgive my mother-in-law. I've not been able to forgive my father-in-law. I've had this grudge against my friend, against this guy who cheated me out of 2 lakhs or whatever it is. And as these things come up, the unconscious thoughts, ideas, attitudes come out. Lord, I'm unsure of myself. I want to have a better job. All these things will come up. But then God's scripture will tell us in Matthew 6:33, seek his kingdom. Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about your food and clothing and what we shall eat. You don't have to run after these things. So this is how scripture would change our hearts and minds. And it would bring out that love is the key. That for God, for yourself, and for others. How did you get into addictions? Perhaps because you were rebelling against your parents. You succumbed to peer pressure, whatever it was. Okay. How did you get into this marriage which was not very wise? Because you were running after money, perhaps. But perhaps because you forgot that charm is deceitful and beauty is fleeting. And you did not look for a person who loved the Lord. It was your mistake, perhaps. Perhaps you can now correct it. You can ask forgiveness and make the best of what you have and love your spouse anyway. Perhaps these things are the things which you will need to do, and that's how the Spirit will uncover it for us. Okay, so once you have understood the issue, accept it, stop denying, keep trying to understand. It may take a long time, okay? Work on forgiveness for yourself, if there is something to forgive for yourself, and then for others. Keep praying that God would help you to understand the process and get over these things. If there is another person involved, pray and wish the other person well as well, in detail about other things. For instance, I've had to struggle with very negative thoughts and feelings about the leader of our country. All right. And I've had to be reminded by the Lord often that I need to, in my mind, let him go. Okay. That does not mean that everything is fine. That does not mean that uh, there should not be justice. Okay. But it means that in my mind, I set him free from my expectation of him. And I wish that person well. And I hope that they will come to the Lord. So this is what I need to do to set myself free from the anger and hate that witness. I need to begin the process of change. And it will take time. It will take work and perseverance. It's not going to happen overnight. But love always perseveres, isn't it? Get help if you require it. If the whole process is taking very long, if your feelings are overwhelming you, if the addictions are very strong, if there are suicidal urges, if there's a family history, or if there's violence, please go and get help, because this is, you may not be able to do it on your own. Okay, so one warning before I stop. Forgiveness is the goal often when there's a conflict with your spouse, or if there's some problem at the workplace or whatever, but do not push forgiveness very quickly. This is a very common mistake even counselors make. Okay? Particularly where sexual abuse and domestic violence and all that is concerned, you cannot push forgiveness. You have to put it as a goal, but you cannot push it on the person. It has to come from themselves. Okay, healing comes slowly. Healing often comes when we focus off healing to doing something else that helps us, particularly doing something else that helps the other person. Okay, so this is a paradox and warning to remember. All right, so now let's go to an exercise to kickstart the process. And I want each of you to have a pencil or paper out where you just look at this question. What makes you scared? What makes you scared? Think of it. It's probably coming from your unconscious mind. And the thing that makes you scared is probably going to drive your behavior. If you're scared of getting sick, you probably will be overcautious with your children. You'll probably worry too much about your parents. You will probably not take too many risks. That is what will happen to your behavior. If you're scared about losing what you have, you might be very, very worried about keeping your things in order. You might be suspicious of the servants. All sorts of things may happen, right? What are you scared of? What makes you angry? Who makes you angry? You probably have a conflict with that person. You probably have some grudge against that person. What made you angry with that person? Was there some hurt, some bitterness, something they did or said? Your parents, your relatives, a friend? Is it your spouse? Sometimes if they correct you or expect something from you, it's possible that people go and actually do the thing that they're being accused of. So if your wife is worried about you drinking, you may just go and drink. If your husband is after you that you spend too much money, you may just go and spend more money. Is that happening? What makes you angry? In-laws, relationships, figure it out. What makes you worry? Who have I had differences with? Keep these questions in mind and work on them. They will uncover a lot of the problems that you are having, okay? And they will help us to sort it out. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to everybody now. You can take 5 minutes to just read this case. Do we have time, Abhijit?
Yes. We can go on. We can go on. We can stretch it for more time.
All right. So I will just read this case study out. You can put your answers either in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and talk. Rajan's parents are government school teachers. He does well in school and gets admission to a good college. There he makes a few friends from well-to-do families who drive to college on their bikes or cars, and who often have mixed parties on weekends. Rajan is shy of all the pretty girls he meets. When teased by his friends, he starts drinking and finds he likes it. He gets a good job when he finishes and works very hard. He buys an expensive car and agrees to an arranged marriage when a beautiful girl's proposal is brought to him. He's hoping for a promotion in a few years, but is devastated when a well-connected and articulate young man gets it instead. He drinks a lot before he comes home that day. When his wife shows her disappointment, he snaps at her that she need not try to tell him what. Okay, so what do you think could be lurking deep inside Rajan's mind? So he has a lot of the problems that we've talked about, right? He's got the addictions and he's got a conflict in the family. He's got problems at the workplace. What do you think is lurking deep inside?
Yeah, would anyone like to answer? You could unmute and answer or put it on the chat. What do you think is lurking inside Rajan? Anyone? You can try.
Fear of rejection?
He is frustrated.
Okay, he's frustrated. Frustrated with what? Yeah.
When his expectations did not meet, he didn't meet his expectations, he got frustrated in all
what
the
do you
areas.
think the expectation was?
He expected promotion. It didn't happen.
He expected promotion.
He got
okay. Okay, he
And,
expected promotion and it didn't happen. Rachel has said, Rachel, you want to expand on that? Fear of rejection, is it, or rejection? Rejection?
Rejection, actually, because
rejection.
Because first he started drinking when he felt that he couldn't come up with his friends. So slowly he is getting into what he is not, just to overcome that fear, so that he is not singled out and he wants to be in the company of other people. Like that's what I think. So he wants acceptance at all levels and first class acceptance from at all levels. So this doesn't happen to him always.
All right. So he's wanting to be accepted by the social circle that he's in, which is what sort of social circle was that?
Which is not what they call not a spiritual circle to my mind.
Not a spiritual circle, but it's also much richer than he is, no?
Yes, not above his type. It's a more worldly type.
Yes. Right. It is completely different from him. It is a richer kind of set, and he is fearing rejection from them, Rachel says. Okay, so all right, thank you. Mary, not a social being. What do you mean? Would you want to expand on that?
Probably wants to just mix up with people of higher, identify with them, not with a little lower status of society.
Okay, so he's trying to identify with those of upper status. Okay, right? Okay. Financial insecurity over social status. Okay. I don't know who that is. Would you like to unmute and explain?
Yeah, sister, this is Rambabu. Probably his problem is he is not able to accept himself fast. And the second thing is he always feels he's an odd man out.
Okay. So there's a financial insecurity and there is a social insecurity. That's what you're saying? Okay. Thank you.
Ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Why do you all think he snapped at his wife?
Maybe it's a kind of prideness. Who is she to tell me?
Who is she to tell me, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Probably to discharge his frustration, he took it as a channel of discharging his frustration.
Okay, maybe he's just he's frustrated with someone else and he's just discharging it at her. But also there's the thing that she's telling her that don't tell me what to do. Isn't it? So there's also a slightly personal thing at her also, that you don't tell me what to do. In other words, I know what to do. Don't try and put me down. Something like that. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. He is not able to accept his real situation.
Right. Okay. Anybody else?
Looking for self-worth.
Looking for self-worth. Okay. So his self-worth is good, bad?
It seems to be bad because the job means everything to him.
Yeah, the job is a way to get the social status that he's craving, right? He's obviously feeling, if you look at him, he has been teased and sort of has felt insecure around his friends always, right? Because they are well-to-do, they have vehicles, they have mixed parties, they are good with girls, you know, they drink, they do all these things. So he's feeling inferior. He's feeling he's not able to fit in. And in order to fit in, he's starting to drink and starting to do the things that he could do. And you notice that he's happy when a beautiful girl's proposal comes to him, because he couldn't talk to the beautiful girls earlier, right? And this happens, it can happen, you know, it happens many times. Then he's hoping for a continued progress in his job, because that is what is making him fit into that sort of group. But that's not happening. And if it doesn't happen, he's going to drink. And then when his wife remonstrates with him, he tells her, no, I know what to do. Don't tell me what to do. So he's sort of feeling that you're also trying to be superior to me and tell me what to do and correct me. So that's not going to happen. I am, so he's sort of lashing out at her because of that. All right. So you see how what is inside creates the problems outside. That is what I was trying to get at. If we want to bring real change, we have to work on our inner selves. We have to work on what is inside. So that has been the main point of my session today. And thank you very much. Okay, so I just remind you that the mind is like an iceberg, or like that Johari window that you saw, or else like this weird library, okay, which has a nice front section, but inside is chaos and disorder. And if we want to understand our minds, we have to delve inside. We have to shed the light. We have to bring up what is inside, our thoughts, our attitudes, our inner desires and aspirations. And they will come out. Okay, they can't be hidden. They will come out sometime or the other. In our thoughts, our words, our speech, they will reveal what we really think and what we really want. And so it is a challenge to each one of us to find what is inside our minds. And as Christians, we have a lot of help in this, and others can find other ways to do it. They can use other forms of meditation, try and find what is inside them. As Christians, we see that in times when we pray and read scripture, allow the scripture to correct you and bring out your hidden thoughts and attitudes. And that can help us to understand and correct ourselves. And lastly, if you can't do it by yourself, please get help. Okay? Yeah. So any questions or comments?
Yeah, I think we can just jump into the